Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode number 5 of Driving Newfoundland. I would first like to apologize for this video. Why, you ask? Well, on this day, it was one of the bad weather days. The camera sits outside the vehicle and is subject to all the elements. Today was especially rainy. On that note, here we go. On this adventure, you join us on a trip from Botwood to Twillingate and Crow Head, where we fought the rain, fog, and especially the wind. We drive to the end of Main Street in Twillingate and do a small hike and also visit the Long Point Lighthouse in Crow Head. So sit back, grab some snacks, and relax as we take you on a rainy adventure. Please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy this video. Have you been to Newfoundland? We would love to hear your adventure in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Enjoy. Highway 340, known as the Road to the Isles, is a coastal route in Newfoundland that connects communities like Virgin Arm and Hillgrade to Newville. Its history is tied to the region's deep connection with the sea, with development centered around harbors and fishing industries, much like many other coastal areas in Newfoundland where sea travel was the primary mode of transport for centuries. The highway provides access to these seaside communities that grew around harbors, and its development reflects the transition from sea-based to land-based transportation in the region. The communities along the route, such as Newville, developed because of their harbors, which were essential for the fishing industry. Before roads, sea travel was the main way to connect these places, with packet boats and later government-subsidized steamers being crucial for transportation and trade. The existence of Highway 340 is a testament to the transition from relying on sea lanes to using roads for transportation. The highway provides land access to these once isolated coastal communities. The highway's nickname, Road to the Isles, highlights its connection to the nearby coastal communities and islands, emphasizing the importance of the sea in the region's history and geography. Today, the highway provides a scenic route that showcases the coastal landscape and the enduring heritage of the seaside communities, while also serving as a vital land link for residents and visitors. Lewisport was settled in 1887 and was initially named Big Burnt Bay before being renamed after logging pioneer Lewis Miller around 1900. Its history is defined by its deep-water port, which made it a hub for fishing, logging, and shipbuilding. The town served as a crucial Canadian military base during World War II, and after the war, it developed into a major distribution and shipping center for the province. Settlers first arrived in the area around 1887, driven by the fishing, logging, and shipbuilding industries. The town was initially called Big Burnt Bay, then Marshallville, and was eventually renamed Lewisport around 1900 to honor lumber pioneer Lewis Miller. Miller used the harbor to ship lumber, and Lewisport quickly grew into a significant logging and shipping center. During World War II, Lewisport was a vital base of operations for the Canadian forces. After the war, the town grew into a major distribution center, with companies like Lewisport Wholesalers 1947 and Steers Limited 1949 establishing operations to supply the entire province. It also became a base for freight and passenger services to coastal Labrador, earning it the nickname Gateway to the North. In 2001, Lewisport gained widespread recognition during Operation Yellow Ribbon, when it helped host and care for hundreds of passengers from flights diverted to Gander following the September 11th attacks. The town continues to utilize its deep-water port, which is open year-round, to support various businesses, including those in the oil industry. Michael's Harbor is just outside Lewisport. There are no stores or services, and residents must commute to Lewisport for essential services and Campbellton for education until the 9th grade. They commute to Lewisport for high school. The community had a crisis in 2020 where a house burned down, and it was determined that no fire department was obliged to provide services to the community. In February of the same year, the issue was resolved, where the Lewisport Fire Department agreed to provide service in exchange for $50 fee per homeowner. Campbellton, Newfoundland is named after John Campbell, a local sawmill manager, and was settled by people from southwestern England and southeastern Ireland. The area's history is tied to the cod fishery, with families moving between coastal summer homes and inland winter homes, a practice that decreased as social services improved. The town itself later developed, eventually incorporating as a town in 1888. The area was settled by migrants from England and Ireland who moved to the region primarily between the mid-17th and mid-19th centuries. Many early inhabitants were involved in the cod fishery, leading to a semi-nomadic lifestyle of moving between coastal and inland homes. These settlements were often isolated, with families becoming self-sufficient through fishing, farming, and livestock. Comfort Cove Newstead is a small fishing community located outside Campbellton. It has a recently renovated town hall, a fire department, a corner store with post office, 2 churches, and other services, including a fish processing plant and a vegetable farm. There are many services such as a playground, town hall, community center, fish plant, fire hall, local store, vegetable farm, and more. The children in this town, along with those from Campbellton, Birchie Bay, Baytona, Loon Bay, and Michaels Harbor, attend a K-9 school in the Campbellton and High School in Lewisport. There are about 248 private dwellings in Comfort Cove Newstead, covering a land area of about 29.83 square kilometers. There is a Salvation Army place of worship, a United Church, and Culls Point Cemetery there. Baytona, originally named Birchie Bay North, was settled by fishermen in the 19th century and later renamed after Daytona, Florida. Historically, its economy was based on fishing, but a decline in cod and lobster stocks caused a shift away from this industry. Today, it is a small rural community known for its scenic landscape and strong community bonds. The history of Birchie Bay is centered around its early community life, including the roles of traditional doctors who used local plants and other natural remedies, and midwives like Amelia Lewis, who is said to have delivered over 100 babies. The community's medical history was shaped by these healers, rather than formal medical degrees, with figures like John Canning recognized for their skills in treating injuries and ailments. Route 331, also known as Boyd's Cove Highway, is a 27.4-kilometer-long east-west highway. It connects the town of Boyd's Cove with the Gander Bay area of the island. Route 331 begins in Boyd's Cove just south downtown at an intersection with Route 340, Road to the Isles. It winds its way east through rural areas between some lakes to have an intersection with Route 335 Farewell Road, which provides access to the ferries leading to the Change Islands and Fogo Island. The highway then has an intersection with a short local road leading to Horwood shortly thereafter, and dipping southeast for several kilometers. Route 331 begins following the coastline of Gander Bay as it passes through the communities of Rogers Cove, Victoria Cove, Wings Point, and Clark's Head. The highway now makes a sharp turn to the east to cross the Gander Bay Causeway over Gander Bay to enter Gander Bay south and come to an end shortly thereafter at an intersection with Route 330 Gander Bay Road. Around 300 years ago, Boyd's Cove was the location of a Beothuk village, supported by the rich resources of the ocean. The site has yielded evidence of Beothuk occupation between approximately 1650 and 1720. Archaeological excavations have uncovered details about Beothuk housing, diet, and seasonal movements. The site has also revealed evidence of the integration of European items, like beads, into Beothuk culture, suggesting peaceful contact. The Boyd's Cove site has also contributed to the understanding of the Beothuk people's disappearance, though factors like disease, starvation, and conflict with settlers played a role in their decline. The site was officially located during a survey in 1981 by Dr. Ralph Pastor. It was designated a National Historic Site of Canada in 1995. The Beothuk Interpretation Center is located in Boyd's Cove to help visitors learn about the history and culture of the Beothuk people. The center features exhibits, artifacts, and a walking trail to the original village site, marked by outlines of house pits. A spirit garden at the site is dedicated to the memory of the Beothuk people. A sculpture on the walking trail also commemorates their tragic demise. Somerford's early economy was driven by fishing and logging. The community was historically significant, indicated by the presence of 3 well-attended churches, which points to the importance of religion in the town's life. As Newfoundland was a British colony at the time, many men from Somerford served in World War I and World War II. The absence of many men during these conflicts had a significant impact on the town. The town hall was built in the early 1970s despite some initial resistance to the taxes required to fund it. It quickly became a vital part of the community, housing the fire station and library. The community's focus on healthcare led to the construction of a clinic, SLH House, in the 1960s, followed by a larger clinic to meet the needs of the growing population. The town is governed by a mayor, deputy mayor, and councillors. Students attend New World Island Academy, which provides education from kindergarten to grade 12. Route 345 is a 16.1-kilometer-long north-south highway on New World Island. It connects the communities of Virgin Arm Carter's Cove with Tizards Harbor on the western half of the island. Route 345 begins in Virgin Arm Carter's Cove at an intersection with Route 340, Road to the Isles. It winds its way west through town before leaving and heading northwest through rural areas to pass through Chansport. The highway now winds its way through wooded and hilly terrain for several kilometers to come to an intersection with a spur road leading to Bridgeport, where it turns north to enter Morton's Harbor. Route 345 has an intersection with a road leading to Valley Pond before winding its way northeast through town. It heads northeast through rural areas for several more kilometers to enter Tizards Harbor, where it comes to an end at the center of town. While the exact date is not provided in the snippets, Dildo Run Provincial Park was established in the late 20th century to preserve a scenic wilderness area. The region itself has a long history, with evidence of human habitation dating back to 2000 BC. The name Dildo has been in use since at least 1711, although its exact origin is unknown. The park's main purpose is to offer recreational opportunities in a beautiful, natural setting. It is particularly known for its hiking trails, including the popular Dildo Run Trail, which is suitable for all skill levels. Other activities include experiencing the serene lakes and surrounding wilderness. Hillgrade is an unincorporated community that is part of the Fairbanks-Hillgrade area along Route 340. The history of the region is linked to the larger patterns of settlement in Newfoundland, which were heavily influenced by migration from southwestern England and southeastern Ireland between the mid-17th and mid-19th centuries. The economy of the area, and therefore the history of communities like Hillgrade, is closely tied to the region's traditional fishing industry, which has been a staple in Newfoundland for centuries. The area also has a history of mining, which shaped the development of communities like Tilt Cove, also part of the Fairbanks-Hillgrade area. The history of Hillgrade cannot be separated from the history of its surrounding communities and the broader history of Newfoundland, which is marked by periods of exploration, fishing, and resource-based industries. Route 346, also known as Two Good Arm, is a highway that leads from Route 340, Road to the Isles, near Newville to Two Good Arm, all on New World Island. The highway runs for 13.5 kilometers and connects the communities of Cobb's Arm, Rogers Cove, Pike's Arm, Green Cove, and Two Good Arm to Route 340. Route 346 begins near Newville at an intersection with Route 340, Road to the Isles, and it heads northeast through wooded and hilly terrain for several kilometers to pass through Cobb's Arm, where it has an intersection with a local road leading to Rogers Cove. The highway now curves to the northwest to meet a local road leading to Pike's Arm and Green Cove before entering Two Good Arm and coming to an end at a cul-de-sac. Indian Cove was settled in the early 1800s and was a seasonal fishing community. Residents would live by the coast from May or June to October, with their lives centered around fishing. In 1857, 5 people were counted in the census. By 1965, the population had grown to 43 residents before resettlement occurred around that time. A resettlement program, likely around the 1960s, led many people to move from Indian Cove to Mary's Harbor, leading to the community's decline. Accounts from former residents, like Ralph Bradley, describe a childhood in Indian Cove as free, with life deeply connected to the fishing lifestyle. Twillingate has a long history of habitation dating back to at least 1500 BC, with a significant period of French fishing in the 17th century. By the 1730s, it became England's northernmost fishing settlement and a major hub for the cod and seal fisheries in the 19th century. The town was incorporated in 1962 and has since evolved, with its economy increasingly driven by tourism, particularly due to its nickname Iceberg Capital of the World. The area has been inhabited for about 3,500 years, beginning with the Maritime Archaic and later the Dorset Eskimos. French fishermen were likely the first Europeans to name the area Twillingate in the 17th century, after a group of islands off the coast of Brest, France. Twillingate became England's most northern fishing settlement in the 1730s. In the 19th century, Twillingate was one of Newfoundland's largest centers for the Labrador cod and seal fisheries. The town was incorporated as a municipality in 1962. With the decline of the fishing industry, Twillingate's economy has shifted to tourism. It is now known as the Iceberg Capital of the World, attracting visitors who come to see icebergs and whales. The Women's Institute, established in 1966, is a historic landmark that started by making clothes for victims of the 1929 Newfoundland tsunami and continues to support the community. Little Harbor is a drive-through community of 13 families on South Twillingate Island, off the North Shore. It is located approximately 3 kilometers south of Twillingate on Route 340. Little Harbor is known for a scenic atmosphere and authentic small-town feel. Little Harbor has several wharfs, which were used by fishermen years ago, as well as a historic church that is no longer regularly used and a trail that leads to Lower Little Harbor, which can be walked, biked, or drove on using a 4x4 vehicle. One of the main attractions in Lower Little Harbor is the Natural Arch. Icebergs attract tourists to the Little Harbor and Twillingate area each year. Once you get to the intersection in Twillingate, to the left, heads to North Twillingate and Crow. To the right is Durrell. The area around Durrell has a long history of human inhabitation, with evidence of maritime archaic people dating back to around 1500 BC. French fishing fleets were active in the waters from 1650 to 1690, and the name Twillingate is believed to have originated from the French name Twillingate. Durrell is a part of the town of Twillingate and is accessible via Route 340, known locally as Durrell Street. The community is historically linked to the sea, with a strong connection to fishing and cooperage, as reflected in its history. Located on Museum Street, this museum provides a look into the community's past through artifacts from the late 1800s and early 1900s. The museum includes displays on the area's fishing history, cooperage, and the Armed Lads Brigade and its role in the World Wars. The museum also features an exhibit about the great auk, a flightless bird that was once common to the region and is now extinct. The museum showcases the history of this organization, which played a significant role during World War I and World War II. If you are a wine enthusiast, then don't forget to visit the Auk Winery. The road through Durrell comes to an end. Here you will find some amazing hiking trails. We decided to take a short hike and endure the wind and rain. It would have been nice to spend a bit more time there and enjoy the vast trails available. North Twillingate and Crow Head's history involves ancient indigenous inhabitants, followed by French and then English settlement in the 17th and 18th centuries, establishing them as major fishing and trade centers. Crow Head was a distinct settlement primarily focused on fishing, and later added logging and mining, eventually becoming a formally incorporated town in 1960. Twillingate was a major port, nicknamed the capital of the North, for centuries until the collapse of the cod fishery. Archaeological evidence from as far back as 1500 BC shows the maritime archaic peoples inhabited the area. Later, the Beothuk, and possibly the Dorset Inuit, also lived in the region. French fishermen frequented the area possibly as early as the 1500s and gave the islands the name Twillingate, which is similar to a French coastal group. Permanent European settlement began in the 17th century, with settlers primarily being English fishermen and their families from Devonshire. For over 2 centuries, Twillingate was a thriving fishing community and a vital trade center for the Labrador and shore fisheries. The Long Point Lighthouse was established in 1876, not for overseas shipping, but to aid the local fishermen and coastal traders in the area. The community's economy was deeply impacted by the northern cod fishing moratorium in the late 20th century, which devastated the area's major source of employment. While people were living in Crow Head much earlier, the first land grant was not issued until 1885, suggesting settlement occurred earlier in the 18th century. The primary livelihood was fishing, with the majority of settlers being Methodists. Later, lumbering and mining also played a role in the early 1900s. The town of Crow Head was officially incorporated in 1960, the first community on Twillingate Island to do so. history of Crowhead. While land grants date to the 1880s, the area was likely settled much earlier, possibly in the early 1700s. The first land grant was given to Job Hamlin. The community thrived on inshore cod, salmon, and herring fisheries. Lumbering and mining were also significant industries. Between 1910 and 1918, copper was mined at Sleepy Cove, near the lighthouse. In 1911, Crowhead is first recorded as its own community. In 1960, the town of Crowhead was incorporated, the first community on the island to do so. In 1962, Johnny Hamlin was elected mayor and became Canada's longest-serving mayor. Post-1960s, the town's population has declined from its peak, and the economy has shifted away from the heavy reliance on the fishery seen in previous decades. The Long Point Lighthouse was completed in 1876. This historic lighthouse is associated with the development of both Crowhead and Twillingate, and remains an important landmark. The Crowhead Cave area has been the site of archaeological investigation, including excavations at Crowhead Cave. This concludes Episode 5 of Driving Newfoundland. The weather can turn nasty, so make sure you bring your warm jacket, but don't forget your shorts for the much warmer days. We hope you enjoyed this installment. Is there something more you would like to see in these videos? Drop us a comment in the section below. Please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for Episode 6, where we take you on a much nicer day on 360 Bay of Espoir Highway to Harbour Breton. We visit the Rocky Point Lighthouse and take some drone footage of this beautiful landscape. Have you been to Newfoundland? We would love to hear of your travels, so tell us in the comments section below. Thank you for enduring this rainy day with us, and see you in the next video. Take care.